It is an incredible pleasure to be able to introduce Fred. Dr. Sherratt works as a senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University in the UK and is joining us from a late spring evening, cold spring evening in the UK. Thank you, Fred, for coming to speak to us. Fred, of course, is a key figure in much of the movement that we want to make when it comes to doing safety in a more innovative way. One of the things that we need to do is look at the baggage that we have carried with us so far. And of course, a very big piece of legacy baggage is a focus on zero. Fred is unique among scholars in the world who has been able to generate empirical evidence suggesting very strongly that focusing on zero, targeting it, making bonuses around it is an incredibly bad and dangerous idea. It is not just an ideological battle, it is an empirical one. Fred is among those who has written about it lucidly, clearly, and a very important voice to contribute to that very debate. I am very keen to hear her contribution today. When you aim for nothing, it won't get you there. I mean, that idea, aiming for nothing and not even getting there, even though you're aiming for nothing. I mean, how can you aim for nothing and not even get there? You know, how lousy must you be? So, or how strange must that goal indeed be? Fred, if you're ready to go, I am all ears, as are many others.
Hello, everybody. Yes, welcome from the UK, 11 o'clock at night, and real pleasure to be here today. So, as was mentioned earlier, I'm an academic. But my industry is construction. I had a fantastic 10 years on site in the UK, actually working alongside another speaker in this very session. But that was a wee while ago. I'm a mixture of practice and academe, and I'm really, really pleased to be the warm-up act at this amazing event organised by ForgeWorks. And I'm pretty sure I'm only not headlining because of the awkward time zones. But anyway, today I'm going to talk to you about zero. So zero is the biggest number in occupational health and safety. It's where we all want to get to, right? Zero accidents, zero incidents, zero harm. Nobody wants anyone to get hurt at work, but people do get hurt. So why not zero? In fact, ethically, where else could we go? It's the only acceptable number to aim for, right? Well, yes, it is, if that's the question you want to ask. Because zero comes with a paradox. And that paradox is that zero can actually create far more problems than it solves. And as Sydney just mentioned, my colleague Andy Dainty and I were actually able to empirically prove that for the UK construction industry, you were statistically more likely to have a major or fatal accident while working on a site with a zero target programme than a site that didn't. We looked at the UK government data over a 4-year period. We cross-referenced to projects and safety programmes and the top 20 firms by turnover. That gave us a good size of organisation with a likely good investment in health and safety, a good benchmark. But we found that for fatal accidents, major injuries and subsequent AFR per £1 billion of turnover, in all cases, more accidents happened with zero than without it. And in fact, there was no clear pattern of improvement or change to an organisation's accident profile after the introduction of zero. For some firms, introducing zero initially increased the accident rate, although some then did see a downward trend on their project. But others, it had the opposite effect. Zero was championed early on. It brought early success. Accident rates dropped. But then they crept back up over time. But what's super important about this data is that it reveals prima facie that the notion that espousing zero will bring about zero accidents is fundamentally flawed. Fact. And I know that's a pretty good mic drop moment, but don't worry, there is more. Because we probably want to know why. And although some have said that the exact nature of the beliefs behind zero are not very interesting, because they were more interested in the consequences of such programs, which, as I've just shared, are not that great either. I would, and I actually have, challenged that, because such beliefs do matter. They're one of the things we can look at that helps us explore and explain the why of zero. To get right in amongst this front end is precisely what we need to do. to unpick the nuance, the understandings, the little things. So let's go to the London 2012 Olympics. This was the only Olympic construction project ever to have 0 fatalities amongst its workforce, a real achievement. And what they did on that project was awesome occupational safety support. There was occupational health was prioritised higher than it had ever been in the UK construction industry, on-site nurses, clinics to look after the workers. There was a considerable investment of time and money in the health and safety of the project, and it paid off. Nobody died. But people still got hurt. Even with all of that, the final AFR was still 0.15. But you know what? That was awesome. And the project still won a Royal Society Award for the prevention of accidents, simply because for a job that big, that many hours, that many people, that's a really good going. And you know what? They did use 0. But this is where we can start to pick at the corners of 0. We can unpick one little thing, because how we use 0 matters. Because on the Olympics, they used 0 tolerance. Not 0 harm or target 0 or anything else that sounded even vaguely like a KPI. 0 tolerance. Because 0 tolerance is an attitude, a belief. It's not actually an ultimate goal. And that matters. Because on the next big London construction project, 0 was front and centre yet again. Well, hey, we'd show the world how it's done, right? We'd done the Olympics, we could do that again. And this time, ambitions were up even higher. They were aiming for target 0, but sadly it didn't work. Somebody was killed. So what was different? Well, you could argue that the Olympics wasn't a real project, bounded by commercial realities. And I've made that argument myself in the past. You could argue that with the whole world watching, the industry upped its game on the Olympics. Yeah, you might well be right. But also, the 0 wasn't the same either. Because 0 tolerance is a safety management approach, a practice. 0 target is a paradigm shift in the philosophy of safety management, and that matters. Because what it does is bring us an apocalyptic moment of safety success. It creates a post-apocalyptic utopia in which 0 accidents or illnesses occur. And I don't say it wouldn't be wonderful to get there. And now, as we're already into utopian thinking, let's pick at that a little bit more, because it's an interesting place to go. Usually, utopian thinking is met with derision. But there have been calls for its revival. I mean, we need a bit of utopia in the current world we all find ourselves in, right? But as Jacobi says in his book, Picture Imperfect, practical reforms depend on utopian dreaming. Or at least utopian thinking drives incremental improvements. Utopian thinking can get us places. It's what fundamentally has changed the world of occupational safety at work from when we go right back to the first industrial revolution. But utopia is also what makes 0 so appealing. But let me just pull you back to the idea that it's how we do 0 that matters. Because there are different types of utopian thinking, and these have different consequences. We can see our 0 target apocalypse as a clear goal. It's one that can be achieved through clear steps, for example, monitoring our AFRs. And yes, of course, there are technocratic management issues here too, but that's a whole other presentation. And to use Jacobi's terms, this is a blueprint utopia. The future is mapped out in detail. There are lots of KPIs to help us monitor and measure our way to safety success. We can manage our way towards that 0 goal. But the alternative to this is an iconoclastic utopia. Let's smash things apart, in which dreams of a society and an better society remain just that. There's no articulation. There's no detailed representations. We can think and dream and build our castles in the sky. And that's super important, because what this approach also does is it gives us power. It gives us the power to question and challenge, to, as Jacobi says, to escape the quotidian, to get away from this is the way we do things around here because this is how we've always done them. It enables us to challenge those very systems and processes and think of totally different ways of doing things that could bring about change for the better. But this takes effort. It certainly takes a hell of a lot more effort than setting a few KPIs. And I'm sure some of you are already making the connections between these perspectives and ongoing discussions around systemic safety and how much perhaps our endeavours to that end protect more the industrial systems and norms as they grew up through historical roots, more so perhaps than those forced to work within them. Who is adapting to whom is a key question there. But again, sorry, whole of the presentation. Let's go back to utopias and back to zero. So it was actually in my empirical work, exploring zero on construction safety, talking to workers out on my sites, unpacking the programs, the processes, the training that was put in place to make zero happen within construction organizations and on their projects. And it was through this that I was actually able to find clear evidence of both of these types of utopia. And these also help us explain a bit more about zero. Or, in fact, it's actually the opposite, because frankly, it's a mess, although it's an expected mess at that, of course. Understandings of zero, no matter the title of the zero affiliated initiative, it varies significantly. And other researchers in this space have also found that to be the case. There are many, many different zeros. For example, is zero a participant in its own journey, or is it the end? Is it a target? Is it simply a lack of harm? Is it something tangible that we can actually measure? And of course, measuring safety, a whole other presentation there as well. But we can measure it, I suppose. We can measure it by time. Is there a date after which accidents simply won't happen? And it would be a bit cheeky of me, I suppose, to name the firm who did have to change their zero harm date-focused strapline several times, as those dates sadly simply passed them by without achieving that apocalyptic moment of success. Or should we measure by accident frequency rates, which risks, unfortunately, making just one incident equal failure of the whole approach? But to get away from measurement, is it actually an ethical foundation? Is it a vision, a culture? And then there's a whole other thing right there, I know. Or is it a mind thing, which is the way a worker described it to me? And I thought that was pretty good. But then again, how do we make that play out in practice? More cynically, is it actually just a brand? Is it simply a creation of fodder for the corporate social responsibility machine, where Twitter and social media demand slogans, brave slogans, things like that, or so we're told? But this all depends on how you do zero. Because although it's a mess, clear voices do come through. There's the voice of corporate zero. This is a rational management approach that argues that zero is a realistic goal, an achievable target, and one we can measure our way towards. Research reveals this voice focuses on numbers and continuous improvement, but it fails to make any recourse to the practices that sit behind them. And this is, of course, a blueprint utopia, setting out the path to success. But then there's the voice of the workers on site, those who spend their days within that messy reality amongst the muck and the bullets. And for them, zero as they know it is, frankly, nonsense. They can't get on board with it simply because they can't believe it. It just doesn't fit. Workers work in the real world. They work on commercially bounded projects. They are not working on the London Olympic site every day. They are on sites where people often get hurt and all too often also die. And the dissonance between this presented reality and the one they have to work in is just too great. And so in construction site terms, I'm afraid you're talking bollocks there, mate. But you know what? They still want to get to zero. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want their colleagues to get hurt, their friends, and they would love for zero to come true. But they're happy to build their castles in the sky. Because for them, zero is an iconoclastic utopia. It's a vision for the future. It's somewhere they would really like to go, but for now, impossible. But they need that idea of zero within that iconoclastic form. It's necessary, if only to keep them going throughout the day. But they can't get on with blueprint utopias. It realizes themselves all too often in another boring meeting in the cabins, making no money, another training certificate for the file, another sticker for the hard hat, and another set of posters on the hoardings. But all too often, there is no other discernible change, and that is the problem. Zero on its own is nothing. What zero should do is to focus not on the target or the brand, but on the systems and processes that do need to change to ever bring any hope of actually getting to zero. And we should always perhaps get a little more iconoclastic in this space. And that's certainly the case for UK construction. This is an industry where colleagues and I, it didn't take that much effort to demonstrate that it's fundamentally unstructured for unsafety. From the very time a client conceives the idea for a construction project, the way we do things builds unsafety into the system. And as the statistics show all too clearly, when we try and apply zero to that space, it can actually do more harm than good. But it endures. We still have zero target programs in construction, many other industries and sectors across the world. It's not, unfortunately, showing any signs of disappearing into nothingness anytime soon. And in fact, I want to share with you something relatively new that I found about relatively recently. And this also talks a little to the problems of brand zero, as well as the kind of wider commodification of occupational health and safety, where it's packaged and branded for sale. Because despite challenging zero quite robustly back in 2018, when Z stood for zero harm, from 2020 onwards, you can actually now take an IOSH accredited Vision Zero qualification, which is, and I quote, based on the belief that all work-related accidents, disease, and other harm are preventable. But as we've just explored, it's not as simple as that. Beliefs don't quite work in that way in reality. It doesn't fit with the reality we currently occupy. Indeed, it doesn't actually fit with what most legislation asks us to do. And again, whole of the session right there. But when the root cause of most accidents is gravity, this also struggles to make sense. I personally can fall over quite happily on a flat, clean surface. So it's probably a good thing I'm not on site all that often recently, really. But there's my disengagement right there. And I'm not alone. And that's the problem. Because reality is a place in which the world is messy. And occupational health and safety is also messy. Big ideas like zero matter, but they also need to fit with this messy world we all live in. So emphasizing targets, risk assessment, and the good organization of systems, all of which are a part of this course, reads to me very much like that blueprint utopia, which doesn't always work so well in practice. And I understand investing in people motivating by participation, but this seems to, again, reinforce that issue of trying to force engagement into the same space where dissonance is at its strongest. And there are no iconoclastic ambitions to be found there that I could see. But it's titled Vision Zero all the same. And I don't think this new qualification will help us get there. And I think it might even add to the complications around zero, but I would love to be proved wrong. But we know brand is superficial in safety, blueprints don't work, and it's systemic change that's needed. In fact, evidence from construction in the UK suggests that adopting zero in some shape or form over the past years has actually failed to bring about any significant change for the better. We now have plateauing accident rates in UK construction, and that's despite heroic ventures that target zero, to undertake emission zero, and most ambitiously to go beyond zero, wherever that might be. it can be suggested that the rhetoric of a blueprint zero is actually masking the reality of safety programs, qualifications, initiatives, training that are neither innovating or developing or actually changing anything in wider thinking or practice beyond the application of some new branding. Zero isn't doing anything to help us out with that. So, wrapping this up, what I haven't done is lingered on the practical, consequential problems of zero here. And in fact, some of you might be surprised that I haven't mentioned the underreporting as a consequence, the tendency to develop non-learning cultures where information and problems are hidden, not shared. I haven't talked how zero stifles the debates on safety, or the notion that zero accidents means there were zero incidents, which means there were zero near misses, which means you made zero mistakes. Now that would be something. So instead, what I've talked to you about today is I've tried to take a bit, maybe a left field approach, dig a bit deeper and share why I think how we do zero matters most of all. Because zero isn't simply a shoot for the moon and you'll end up amongst the stars scenario. It's actually a situation incredibly vulnerable to distraction, dissonance, and worker disengagement. It's a situation in which investment can be massively misplaced. It's a situation in which you can lose your whole team in a moment, because to put zero in place clearly demonstrates to them that you simply don't get it. Zero as an iconoclastic dream is one I totally support, but it shouldn't be allowed to get ahead of itself or in its own way through blueprint implementations. It should drive incremental positive change to operational systems and processes. And for us, this can be a challenge because many lie way outside of occupational safety, as traditionally perceived. Of course, we should be everywhere. But the stickers, the new high-vis jackets, well, they're nice and all, but simply aiming for nothing at a fancy safety launch event, well, it just won't get you there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, and both from Brisbane and, of course, from Melbourne and the rest of the world, Fred. What a wonderful way to problematize and talk about this aspiration of zero. Fred, just a short reflection back. Would you suggest, given the iconoclasm that you've spoken of, that this aspiration of zero makes sense only in a Western context, that it's a deeply enlightenment project, that we always believe in progress, and we actually have this sense from millennia back that a world without suffering is possible and achievable and ethically worth striving for, and that other cultures might look at this and go, this makes no sense whatsoever. It's an absurd notion. Are we Westerners in some sense locked into this in a way that other cultures might not be?
I think we are. And I think I find it really, I don't disagree with you there, Sydney, at all. And I think it's a very Western-centric perspective. You can trace the roots of occupational safety management in the UK back to 1802, which came out, the first legislation, certainly in the UK, around occupational health and safety was actually around health and morals. Nobody cared about safety because what they cared about was ensuring that the children, and they were children, working in our mills and factories of the Industrial Revolution got time out to go to church on a Sunday. That was what mattered. And that is what the legislation does, right? So what we have is this growing development of roots through this legislation where we can see that this was bounded particularly to religious and certainly Enlightenment principles, trying to clutch those, which is an interesting dichotomy there. But yes, very, very much so. And something I'm looking... Pardon? Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, I was moving on to another bit. If you wanna come back on that.
Oh, well, this is the paper that you and I definitely need to write. So, but that's a little side note I will make. Yep. So, move on to the next one, and then I have one more question before I give it back to Kim.
Okay. So my other point was there's actually some work that I want to share that I think you'll find interesting. is I'm doing a lot of work with colleagues from Ghana at the minute about actually decolonizing safety culture. Because when we look at the practices, this transposition, this cut and paste off the shelf Western culture into a Ghanaian context, it doesn't work. So I'm currently looking at a piece of work, working with colleagues there to see how, well, to hopefully inspire Ghanaians. They need to develop we need to stop this kind of weird colonization of the world, which is so happening right now. That's my plan.
Notwithstanding the depth of the truth behind that, Fred, I think you've also shown quite clearly that it doesn't even work in the West.
No, I know.
So let's not forget that either. So,
true.
Hey, one question that we have from the audience, and you don't need to answer that now, but it's something that we need to consider and perhaps even discuss in the aftermath of this. People are, of course, keen to get their hands on on the stats that you have as an academic, as a scholar. It's easy for me to get this because it's in the published literature, but that's not easily accessible to everyone else. Fred, what are some ways in which people who are listening in on the call can make their boards aware of these numbers?
So I think, well, in the first instance, I think the paper with the statistical data is probably out of embargo. So people should be able to pick that up and find it. And I would hope there is certainly a version of the Utopia paper that is of open access. So if you give me a Google, luckily there's only 2 Fred Sherratts in the world. There's me and an artist guy in America, so that works. So pick the right one, this one, and you should be able to find those. The other thing is I am more than happy to share. I can always email you stuff. So please do reach out, email me, and I will happily share, is the other thing. And
Fred,
maybe I need...
Thank you very much. No, go. Maybe
so I was just going to say, I think I ought to write. I think I need to write an article on this for a wider publication. So I'll get right on that as well, everybody.
So, some industry outlet, and I'm sure some colleagues on the call are happy to help with that and make it as widely available as possible. Absolutely. You know, these numbers need to get out.
Sure.
So thank you, Fred. We could not fight this battle without you. You are a key figure in making progress away from zero. So thank you very much. Kim, I will hand it back to you in Melbourne.